Well, hey there. It's your old pal Keith from wavetables.lol. That's wavetables.lol. And in my last video, I looked at some Bezier curve waveforms that were inspired by looking at the new Zebralette 3 beta free preview of a synth from UHeat that's very interesting, but is not exactly a wavetable synthesizer in the way that we know them. And one of my hot takes after having played with this synth for a little while is that I was frustrated that, one, it can't import traditional wavetables, which are, collections of single cycle waveforms, right? But then further, there didn't seem to be a way to even import single cycle waveforms themselves. However, I was wrong. And some commenters in the comments on my previous YouTube video led me in the direction of figuring out how we can actually load single cycle waveforms into Zebralette 3 so that we can have a nicer starting place than the typical ramp that shows up when you add a new empty curve. You would be hard pressed to actually, draw this curve by hand, which I saw as a kind of needless limitation of the tool. But fortunately, it turns out that we can load single cycle waveforms into Zebralette 3. And so what that means is we can actually take advantage of libraries like KRC Mathwaves, which is a collection of more than 29,000 single cycle waveforms and another 140,000 wavetables for modern wavetable synthesizers. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to myself because I'm re-recording this intro because for some reason, sometimes OBS just goes wackadoodle and it doesn't sync my audio correctly. So hopefully this worked, and we're going to pick up the previous demo already in progress. We're going to talk about how to bring single cycle waveforms into Zebralette. We will look at some kind of more modifications that you can do now that I'm a little more familiar with the oscillator and the multisegment envelope generator interfaces. And also show how to export traditional wavetables from the non-traditional wavetables in Zebralette 3, which is an interesting feature. So take it away, me. Bye. Due to the nature of how Zebralette interpolates between these control points, which is different from a traditional wavetable synthesizer, it has its own distinct character in terms of how a morph from one frame of the quote-unquote wavetable, set of control points in this case, how it morphs to the next frame. And what happens in Zebralette is that the control points actually change into the different positions along the multi-segment editor here, which essentially represent the frames of your wavetable. So if we had something like this, you can kind of imagine how these points morph into each other, and you can actually even see it. The editor is so fiddly. Oh yeah, so you can actually get this view. You click this little exploder guy, the morph. I guess it's called morph. If you look up here in the display, when you hover over things, it'll give you a little help as to what they are. So anyway, so this is the morph, and you can see how over time the different points are morphing into the new points that are then used to generate the waveform that we hear. Okay, talky, blah-de, blah. So I was excited to learn from some commenters in my previous video who were very gracious. One of them said, well, you can drag a waveform into this window, and now, or he actually said a wave file into this window, but it doesn't do a good job of converting it. Take a drink. Now, I wouldn't expect that to work very well, right? Because if you have a sample or some kind of longer recording or something, I wouldn't expect that to convert well, right? Because these are things that represent single cycle waveforms, and anything that's longer than, 256, 512, 1024, 2048 samples is probably not going to give you a good result. But if you have a single cycle waveform, you can in fact import that to the Oscillator and even to the multi-segment envelope generator to give yourself either a starting place or, you know, a breakpoint, a frame across the morph positions. This is very exciting and makes this synthesizer a lot more interesting to me. So, for example, with this polygonal bell sound, if I were to go over here to the Oscillator, I could replace this waveform, which was imported by dragging and dropping. Now, there's no right-click menu for this. And also, since I had recorded my first video, I did go and read the documentation. And it does note that there is like an import section. But as you can see, I can't see it. I don't see anything that says import here. And I have no idea how to get the import menu to reappear once it's gone, except to drag another waveform into here. So let's go. I actually have a folder of wavetables here, which are the 29,500, so what is it? 29,353 waveforms that are in the original KRC Mathwaves Volume 1 collection. These are single cycle waveforms that they have an arbitrary sample rate set of 44.1 kilohertz, but that doesn't matter because they're single cycle waveforms. They just represent the points on the curve, right? And they're 2,048 samples in length. And it turns out that you can drag them and drop them into this window. So let me just go I'll get another one of these polygonal waveforms. Let's see here. Let's do this. Let's do poly 8 sides, base 1 something. Let's do poly 8 sides. We'll try this one. And it's a little fiddly. You have to like drag it from your whatever, your file system, right? And then drop it into the window wherever it says load curve. And now you can hear that. I'm just going to make sure that this isn't morphing. There's another one of those really cool bell sounds. Right? And so I could do things like I could drag another one into here. Let's see here. I need to go back. Don't close that. Let's do this. So we'll drag it. See, we wait till it says load curve. You see, there's some places where you drop it where it won't allow it. And I hate this kind of interface, right? Because you have the potential for having file disasters, right? Like you could actually drag your file to another folder or something. So anyway, here's another one. So let's turn our curve morph down so we're listening to that one. The other way we can listen to a specific frame in the, I guess it's the wavetable, is by hitting pre-listen. So pre-listen lets you toggle between frames, right? Like if there were another frame here, like let's add a morphed curve, we could hear this frame. And I think you can hear what I was just talking about. See, this is bell-like. This one's bell-like. But the morphing, it has some characteristics of a bell-like timbre, but it's a little bit sawtoothy, right? It's a little bit like, it's got harmonics all over the place. And that's because of how this transition happens, right? And again, here's the view that would show you like how these things are morphing into each other, right? Okay, let's click that again. There you go. See, it's pretty complex mapping how these things move, but as they move, what will happen is they will lose that bell-like timbre. Now, that does not happen when you use a time linear morphing like in a traditional wavetable synthesizer. I mean, I'm not going to call that, you know, like a problem, because there's many other things that this method of morphing can do, but it doesn't preserve those timbre relationships that we find in special waveforms like this. And again, you look at these waveforms and listen to them. It would be very hard for you to draw this on your own. So it's nice that there's a starting place. This also allows you to do things like this. Let's do some other examples. Here's a really cool little patch. We'll go back to the main editor. So I kind of use this as my init patch for everything. I really like the idea that the multisegment envelope generator can give you, an exponential kind of curve. And so I'm going to use that to traverse these morph points, right? And this one sounds like this. And you hear how it lands on one of these bell-like tones, and it traverses through another one of these bell-like tones. But it starts with this form anti-waveform like this. That's a real weird guy from my collection, right? But then, when you play that all together, we'll turn off pre-listen, watch the cool animation as this waveform changes. It looks like an arrow that shoots out, and then there's fireworks that kind of grow off behind it, and the timbre changes in this very complex way. Nifty, as I like to say. So this, like I said in my first video, ain't nobody got time for this. Clicking and dragging points around and not knowing what you're going to get, and you're just going to get something that sounds sawtoothy anyway. I do have time for this. I do have time for importing my own waveforms and, making transitions like this. Now, I do wish that I could just import a wavetable and have, this supports up to 16 frames. I think, why couldn't you just decimate the wavetable? Do the tracing algorithm on 16 of the frames and let me import a wavetable. It's not finished yet. It's beta, but I think that would be an excellent idea, even though that might go against Urz's, the creators, kind of, I don't know, philosophy of what this synth is about. But because of this, we can also now import things like, specific types of sawtooth waves. I have all these logarithmic and exponential sawtooth waves, and so you can just import them now. And you have an easy starting place. For very specific sounds you'd like to get. There is also there's some interesting oscillator effects, like this one called Twinkles, that just pings the spectral oscillator. Now, I guess, I'll show maybe a little bit more. This allows you to get all sorts of different sounds. Here's another polybell sound. And then, I did things experimented with, there's a whole set of waveforms in KRC Mathwaves called BRM, which is binary ring modulation, if I remember correctly. And they have a very particular sound. And so here we're morphing between this waveform and this one, which is itself a little bell-like. There's lots of bell-like timbres all across the collection. Let's see. And then, recently I had generated a bunch of waveforms by actually using different spectral techniques to combine 2 or 3 of the original waveform set. And so here's one that's based on these 2 waveforms. And then when they morph, right? Pretty neat. Here's another one. goes really clean at the end. Interesting stuff. So I feel like this technique really brings things to life. These are just some things from when I was originally messing around with importing Mathwaves waveforms into Zebralette 3. And you see and hear that complex modulation going on. Just like we can import single cycle waveforms into the Oscillator editor, we can also, because it's the same editor, import them into the multisegment editor, which can be used, right? The MSEG here, multisegment envelope generator, is an envelope that we can modulate things with. And it's pretty interesting. I find it a little bit fiddly as well. But, we could just take some random waveform. Let's do one that's a little kind of simple. We'll do one of these BRM waves. You can, again, you just drag it over until you see load curve, let it go, and now. And it looks like we undid our sustain there, so I guess when we drag a new thing in, it's going to loop in a different way. There we go. Interesting, yeah? Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. So this is another little sample that's based on waveforms that are part of the Perrin series, which is another kind of esoteric numerical series. We can also do things like we could import, although these are kind of easy-ish waveforms to draw inside of the editor, we could import like shark fin waveforms, like I created a whole bunch of. They have their own unique sound that's somewhere between a sawtooth and a square wave, depending upon the curvature of these things. But boy, is it nice to be able to start with, a waveform that and then, if we wanted to modify this, like maybe put a stronger resonance in here or something. Let's see, I think that's move XY. We could just we could move those down to create this kind of weird resonant thing here. And then let's see. If I select these points, we could do things like right click, and we could do like Cynomatic to turn this into a curve. Maybe we should do, it's a little hard to hear. So you can, these kind of dips that you create in a waveform, those make resonances. We hear this thing getting more nasal over time. If we picked some other points here and kind of did a similar thing, they will morph into this one. Let's also smooth this out. And let's listen to that. Interesting. Okay. There's a lot of other fancy waveforms in KRC Mathwaves. Again, this is from the single cycle waveforms that are included with the set today. These were created with a spectral gating technique, and they are also interesting to morph inside of Zebralette. That's that one. Here's this one. They all have similar sounds, but they're slightly timbrally different. And then morphed. Pretty cool, pretty cool. Now, the other thing that this import technique allows us to do is, even though I wish that I could just, take a wavetable and it would like decimate it and, give me 16 frames, or, just set it to 4, give me 4 of the frames. You can do things like, and these are not in the Mathwaves collection just yet, but since I found an excuse to talk about single cycle waveforms, and since I think this is interesting, I haven't had questions from many other people about the single cycle waveforms, and I hadn't had a lot of interest in, people buying the collection for the single cycle waveforms. But now that there's a popular synth that, boy, really benefits from single cycle waveforms, I'm going to put more of those in. So I'll put more folders of these. But one thing I did is, let's see, I'm going to have to navigate to them. I have all these wavetables, and there's a huge number of them. There are tens of thousands of these that were generated by my variational autoencoder models, which I trained on my waveform collection. And then they learned to generate new things. And then I used all these different techniques to generate wavetables from the V model. We can take the wavetables and we can decompose them into their individual single cycle waveforms, right? And so I did that with a couple of the V collections here. So here's like V 128. And so what I did is just ran a script over this, and I decomposed these things, which actually start with 64 frames a piece. And I just said, hey, let's take the first, the start waveform and the end waveform, and then let's like take 2 more equally spaced from inside those 64 frames. So those turn out to be frame 1, frame 21, frame 42, and frame 63. And then now I've got like a 4 waveform representation. It's not going to be exact, but it's sort of a decimated representation of that waveform. And so you can see what happened here is that these are the individual wavetables. And then when I look inside, now I have the individual single cycle waveforms. So what I did here is I took one of these and put the 4 different waveforms at 4 different evenly spaced, we can distribute them evenly spaced frames inside of Zebralette. And so these do sound a lot like the original V wavetables. And these tend to be very harmonically rich. Interesting, right? Here's from another one of my wavetable models that has a lot more energy to it. These are the waves that V119 produced. They have a lot of zero crossings and are very bell-like. Or you might even just say buzzy. And then morphed, this one sounds like this. And there's a few more here, examples. So this one's very bell-like, and then it gets buzzy as it transitions to that final wave, and then the final waveform turns out to be rather bell-like. Or I guess it's the second to final one. but that's pretty neat stuff. Now, one thing I did want to comment on before we go any further, and how long have I been going? Let's look at the infinity mirror and see how long we've been going. We have been going for 25 minutes. Okay, I'd better like hurry up and shut up, right? All right, joking around. Going back to this initial polybell patch, while the import, like tracing, does a good job of matching the waveform, this is what the waveform looks like if we were to look at it like over in Modwave or some other wavetable synth or in a waveform editor or a DAW. But what I hear is a slightly different timbre than how it sounds in a traditional wavetable synth. And especially as we go down the octaves, these waveforms in their original format, the single cycle 2048 samples per frame format, sound different. They have a little more high frequency energy, and as you go down the keyboard, they get more interesting kind of overtones because you can hear those really high harmonics, which are sometimes inharmonic to the fundamental. But in this case, what I hear Zebralette doing is I suspect this oscillator is a spectral oscillator plus noise, because I think you can hear how the very highest harmonics are represented by noise and not by specific like sine wave harmonics. Listen as we go down the keyboard. You hear that kind of hoovery sound in the background, and that's not just because we're detuning this guy and it's in unison. Let's turn off unison. You still hear it when it's there, and it's not coming from the effects. It's a little noisy in the very, very high harmonics. It's not really a problem. It's just a different type of rendering than I'm used to hearing these with. Just be aware that that's there, I guess. But overall, I think this technique makes Zebralette a lot more interesting. Now, another thing you can do, let's go back to this patch, which I don't think I played yet. Let's look at how this oscillator morphs. Now this was constructed by importing some frames from one of my wavetables. But what I did is I mangled the waveform a bit. We'll undo some of our work here. Let's delete that curve, and I think, yeah, this one. And let's delete this one. So, all right, so here's like a basic morph between two of these waveforms. And then I can do stuff like insert an empty curve here. And what I can do is I could go here, copy this, and I'm going to paste it in there. And you have to do it this way. You have to right click. I wish you could right click copy here and then right click paste here, but you can't do that. And so now these are the same. These frames are the same, right? If we were to listen to this, it spends a little time, right, on these two waveforms. And then let's go copy this one. So we'll do add empty curve. Let's copy this. Let's paste it in here. Oops. Click on it, paste in here. Okay. So now I've got this wavetable that, starts with a thing, holds on it for a part, morphs to this one, and then stays on that. Now, one thing, this seems to be kind of a trope in Zebra, is you've got this under manipulate. This is a scale tool. And so you can do things like this. You can drag across a bunch of points, and then if you take the last point, look at that. You can kind of do this narrowing kind of thing. Like this reminds me a lot of the wavetable narrow morph that you have in Modwave. So we could do that. And then let's go to this one, and let's grab this part of it and sort of morph it back here. And this will give us a very interesting sounding transition, hopefully. I should maybe make that more extreme even, so that we can really hear it. And maybe this should have been bigger. Can I do this? Yeah, I can. There you go. So that's kind of that's a nifty effect. And so, okay, I'm learning some things, you know, as I've watched more videos, particularly from the creator of Zebralette. I will link those, I guess, in the description. Learning some kind of neat tricks around this. Now, another kind of neat thing with Zebralette, which I think is, again, implemented in a bit of a strange way, is that you can actually, even though this is not a traditional wavetable, you can render this out as a wavetable. And it renders out in the format supported by Yuhi's Hive, which I guess uses 101 frames per wavetable. Like, why? I guess because things go from 0 to 100 seems to be the reason. So if you right-click in the waveform display here, you can export wave. And what export wave means is export wavetable. It doesn't export this, you know, this particular frame as a single cycle waveform. It exports a rendered version of the wavetable using this point morphing technique, right? So you can do that. You can export a waveform, and then it will put it over in an exports folder. I assume you can, you know, change something in the settings to change where that goes. But then you can export a wavetable, and you can use those with other wavetable synths. So if we were to go back over into modwave, which I also have loaded here into Bitwig, you can see that I've done that. So let me turn some of this stuff off. Let's just let's say I want to change this. Change that. Okay, let's just make him more static. So this is very similar to the waveform we just heard, but it's been exported and then imported into modwave by going to the librarian, right? And then going to import wave as wavetable and selecting whichever one of these I want, okay? But I've already done that. Let's go back into edit mode. And now we're just going to traverse the wavetable and listen to it. Let's slow that down. You see, it's got that little wibble written into it. So that's sort of neat. Now, ModWave's import is very smart, and it does decimate. So since there's 101 frames in the original wavetable, it decimates it to 64 on import. But you know, you can directly take things out of Zebralette, and you could import them into other wavetable synthesizers, which is pretty cool. You know, it's not the most intuitive editing interface, but it's not the worst either. So that's kind of neat. And then what I did is you know, just, let's see, where do we want to land here? Maybe about there. And then I put a modulator, I put an LFO modulating the position right about where all this stretchiness happens. Whip, 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 where we go wobble, wobble. That's a technical term, wobble, wobble, wobble. There it goes. And then we could also enhance that, right, by using the stretch parameter, which that kind of reminds me of. So there's like a baked-in stretch, and then we've got a programmatic stretch going on. Now that's a little bit of a silly example, but you see the kind of things you could do there. That's, you know, that's pretty cool. I could go back into Zebralette real quick, I guess. Let's see. There were some other things too. So you can actually, since we can import you know, things, wavetables or waveforms, single cycle waveforms, Keith, that's what you're trying to say. Since we can import single cycle waveforms that we might have made, say like the Bezier waveforms that I made based on Zebralette, we could import those back in here and then hear how those sound in Zebralette as opposed to how they sound in ModWave. That's pretty interesting. This one is obviously enhanced. This is not one of those Bezier waveforms. I think I took another waveform and like, kind of scooped it out here, modified it just to see what that would sound like. And same thing here, where I've got one of my Bezier waveforms, another one of my Bezier waveforms, and then in the middle, I just put a different one. This might be one of the BRMs, or maybe this came from one of the FFTs or convolution waveforms that I did. Anyway, it sounds like this. It's cool. It's cool. There you go. So, all right. So there is my I was wrong about Zebralette 3 beta video. Again, I think that a huge collection of single cycle waveforms, like I say, there's currently 29,000 of them in KRC Mathwaves, available at wavetables.lol, are an excellent addition to this product. And then, of course, you get hundreds of thousands of wavetables that are also usable in any number of synthesizers. Korg Modwave, Serum, Vital. There's WT versions for Surge XT and for Bitvig's Polymer Synth. You also get like Eurorack versions, so the 16-bit 256 sample per frame for Eurorack kind of wavetables. Basically, the entire collection is available in each of those formats. They are all in the same product, all the same price. I guess that's kind of it for now. Have fun wavetabling and single cycle waveforming. I guess my point of doing, I got distracted by my sales pitch. But the point of what I was saying is I am actually going to decompose more of the wavetables, because many of them were not created from the original single cycle waveforms, but through different techniques. And so I am going through and creating new batches of single cycle waveforms because they're so handy, and I will be adding those to the collection soon. So anyway, you can go to wavetables.lol, get the free version. You can see how things work. There's even a few free single cycle waveforms chosen completely randomly in that collection that you could try these techniques in Zebralette 3 with. There you go. Have a great day. I will talk to you later. Ta-ta for now.